opportunity to repeat some messages that I've preached before. And I wonder sometimes if I preach the same one twice, because I'm not a very good records keeper. And then I thought, I hope so, because I want to preach the best of the topics, and I always love to hear them twice. So I go on and I preach and I have a great time, and I always preach what I wish someone would share with me when I'm in the pews. So here we go. Years ago, remember the famous comedian Will Rogers? He said years ago, and I think it could have been over the COVID source of 100 years ago, but if Will Rogers were here, he would say something like this. Last year we said, things can't go on like this, and we were right, they got worse. It's been a difficult year, hasn't it? And we're in the middle of a very difficult disease, the COVID. It has changed the shape of the American culture in a lot of ways, in the churches. And so I wanted to talk to you about that, because I know at Silverdale United Methodist Church, the COVID experience has changed the way the church works. And I imagine here it has here at Redeemer as well. And so I wanted to share a few words about that I shared with them a while ago when it was my opportunity to speak. What is it like to be a disciple of Christ in a time like this? Sometimes we think it can't get worse, and we're wrong. It really can't. But it can also get a lot better. You know, you would think that Jesus, being the Son of God, if he were going on a trip, that he would take his disciples first class. They would ride in the front of the airplane. You would think that if Jesus was going on a vacation, they would go to the best of places and have the best of times. He would treat his disciples, his beloved followers, to the best. If they were going on a trip, it would be non-stop, everything going well. There wouldn't be any ants at Jesus' picnic if Jesus took him out. But you know, when Jesus went, it was trouble. He went rowing in a boat, there was a storm. If he went on a picnic, there were uninvited guests. Wherever he went, he had a challenge, and his disciples struggled. I was at the store last week trying to think of how I wanted to say this in an effective way. And it was like God said to me, being a disciple is like Brussels sprouts. And I'm holding it, if you can see this at home, this is a stalk of green vegetables, and it's Brussels sprouts. Now, Bill has a different opinion on this. It could be a different kind of sprouts, but I'm not sure. I'm saying it's Brussels sprouts. Well, when I picked this up in the grocery outlet store, before I got out of the store, 3 people, count them, 3 people told me the right way to make Brussels sprouts. They all had about the same recipe. You bake them, you don't boil them, you put them in a pan, you cover them with butter and garlic, and you roast them, and they're the best thing ever. Now, I remember Brussels sprouts as a kid. They were terrible. They were bitter. They were awful. I didn't feel good when I ate them, but I had to eat them because that's the kind of home we live in. I noticed one thing about all the people that told me about Brussels sprouts recipes. Not one of them had Brussels sprouts in their shopping cart. Maybe they didn't like it as much as they thought. You see, because once you get through all the butter, and you suck the butter out of the interior, that's what I did as a kid. That was my strategy. Out the middle, it's still Brussels sprouts. You know, if you're a disciple, you hear lots of people, the disciple of Jesus, you hear lots of people saying lots of things about what it's like to be a disciple of God. Answers your prayer, God gives you all the things that you ask for, and he heals you and he comforts you. But down at the core, there's a cross. Once you get through all the great stuff, there's a lot of great stuff. At the core, there's a cross. And that cross came to the disciples, and it comes to you, and comes to me. Every time I think we deserve first class, I remember the stories of Mark. There was a cross, there was a sacrifice. The disciples lived with a lot of stress. And I think our churches do too. And sometimes we're alarmed by this, and we think, oh no, Jesus isn't watching this, or it shouldn't be like this. And I'm saying, Oh no. Down at the core, it's still Brussels sprouts. There's still a cross for you and for me. Let's read the text again. Number one, if you want to know what it's like to be a disciple, it goes like this. Just because Jesus invited you for a quiet getaway with your closest friends doesn't mean that you will get any rest. That's right. Just because Jesus invited you on a quiet getaway with your closest friends to go on a boat trip doesn't mean that you will get the rest that he promised. Jesus had promised to take his disciples out on a trip. They were tired. They were fatigued. They had been out ministering to the communities. They were so successful at what they did that the people stormed in to see them. They were so busy they could get no rest, Mark chapter 6 says. So Jesus said, let's go take a trip in the country. We'll go camping for a day or two. Recharge our energy. And what happened? 5,000 guests show up. How would you like it if 5,000 guests showed up? It was busy. The disciples, when they left, didn't even have time to eat. You can read this again later at home. They were so busy with the crowd, they didn't even have time to eat. So Jesus brought them out to the wilderness. 5,000 people showed up, and the first thing they said was, we don't have enough food. See, they were hungry, and they hadn't had enough. They were tired, and they didn't have any rest. And 5,000 people showed up. And then finally, when they were gone away, the disciples were saying, this is our chance. We're getting a break. And guess what? Jesus immediately made his disciples get in his boat and go ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida. He made them go. Now you're reading right through that word just the way I did. But the word is he forced them to go into the boat. They didn't want to go into the boat. He compelled them. Now, if you said to me after church, let's get in a boat, we'll go for a ride, and we'll end up and have lunch in Paulsville, and then we'll come back and spend the day boating, I would say, okay, I'm ready. This is good. I'll call my wife and tell her that I was unfortunately delayed by important ministry responsibilities. But I would go. These were boaters. And they said no. They didn't want to. But Jesus compelled them. He forced them to go against their will. Sometimes it's just Brussels sprouts. You work hard. You don't sleep. Do responsibilities that you don't like. There's fatigue. So many times, I remember when I was full-time pastor, it'd be late. I was settling in for the evening, and I had big plans at home, doing nothing, and reading a book, or watching TV, or just spending time with my wife and daughter. And then a phone call would come, and all those plans were changed. And I'd be off to the hospital, to some other situation. You see, it's not always easy. It's not always what we anticipate. Sometimes it's a challenge for us. Number two, we have a whole bunch of these. I'm going to go as fast as I can, which is not all that fast, but I hope you'll read and listen as quick as I can talk. Two, Jesus, just because Jesus promised the disciples a retreat, and because they worked all day with crowds, the 5,000 uninvited guests, and they were trying to escape the crowds and the responsibility, they wanted a time away with Jesus. There's no guarantee that you won't work all night long. So by this time, the disciples have probably been up 48 hours. They haven't had any rest because they rode out to this place. They were too tired when it started, and they get out there. Now Jesus sends them away. They're going to work all night long rowing the boat. Great. It's a long ways across. This is a slow boat. This isn't a fast boat. This isn't a racing shell. It's a big tub of a fishing boat, probably. And Jesus went up on the mountain to pray. How did they feel? They feel like they were left. They felt like Jesus was going to take them out on a picnic, but they didn't. But we like to think that when Jesus would go up on a mountain, certainly something good would happen. Certainly this is the best. Jesus prayed often, we like to say. And that's true, that's a good thing. But just remember, when Moses went on the mountain to pray, God told him to go rescue the people of Israel. He didn't want to go. He argued against it. He said, send somebody else. Send Aaron. Send my brother. Send anybody else. He didn't want to go. See, sometimes when you're on the mountain, the reality comes that God is going to ask you to do something very difficult. When we pray, if we were with Elijah, it would be a difficult time. He was running. He was afraid. He didn't want to hear what God had to say next. When Jesus went up on the mountain to pray, the cross came the next day. Came to the Mount of Olives. And the next day was a very difficult day. You see, when Jesus prays, you don't know what's going to come next, and that's what's going to happen in this story too, isn't it? There was a famous radio speaker named James Dobson, and when he started his career, a long time ago, he was just moving into radio and TV. He was invited to come on TV with Donahue, who had a nationwide show. And just as he came out there at the start, he was really an unknown in the rest of the world. They were coming out from the stage onto into the cameras. Donahue turned to him and said, I just want you to know, I don't believe anything you say or stand for, and I'm going to do everything I can to make you look foolish on camera. And that's how they entered the show. You see, God doesn't always call you to good times. Sometimes it's Brussels sprouts, even when you answer, your prayer is answered. Because James Dobson, his brother, his cousin, prayed at length for this opportunity, and it came. But it was more of a challenge. Just because you're praying, just because you're asking God, just because Jesus is on the mountain, doesn't mean that you aren't alone in the battle. Number 3, just because Jesus promised a quiet time in the wilderness and the crowd showed up to spoil it and take all your food, and 5,000 people came, and just because you worked all day and now you have to work all night, there's no guarantee that you won't be alone at the end of the day. And then when the evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on the land, which means that the disciples were alone in the boat. There they were, alone. They had come to be with Jesus. They had come to spend time with Jesus. They had come to have a break with Jesus. They had been out ministering earlier on in chapter 6. They'd seen the villages. They'd been busy. And now they wanted to spend time with their best friend. They wanted to spend time with the one who loved them the same thing. Feeding of the 5,000, they still hadn't understood that. That was still settled in their mind what had happened to them. It had never happened to anybody before, and it did to them, and now they're rolling and they're thinking, but Jesus isn't there to give them answers. If only he were there to soothe our fears, to explain to us, to coach us, to teach us, to go over it again with us, to tell us we did a good job. Do you ever have that feeling that you finish and then you wonder, I wonder how I did? I'll get in the car when I leave here and I'll go home and I'll say, was it too long? Was it too short? It was never too short, so know that. But maybe it's too wordy. There's not a clock here. I don't know what time it is. I'll worry about it. And I can imagine the disciples would just like a word from Jesus to say, you guys did great. But it didn't happen. Sometimes we think that Jesus will explain everything. Why is the building empty right now? Why are you going home? Why are we together? Why do things happen? And Jesus is on the hillside praying, and he doesn't tell his disciples what's going on. This is my number 4. Just because Jesus promised a quiet time with them alone in a quiet place, and because along came the crowd and spoiled it, and they were forced to row the boat all through the middle of the night, there's no guarantee the wind won't be against you to add to your problems. That's right. He saw the disciples, Jesus did, out there straining at the oars because the wind was against them. People wonder how this works. Jesus on a hill probably about 1,000 feet above the sea level, on the northeast shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he can probably see them, the wind coming from the west to the east. He can see the spray breaking off the bow of the boat, blowing across there in the evening, maybe in the moonlight. He can see the spray, but he's watching. He saw the disciples straining at the oars. Couldn't it have been just a nice day, like the Irish blessing? May the road rise to meet you, and the wind be at your back. May the sun shine softly on your face. May the rain fall on your fields. Well, we get that here. Until we meet again. And God holds you in the palm of his hand. Jesus wasn't Irish. And evidently, he didn't know that lesson because the wind blew and they were straining. The Navy says fair winds and following the seas. Well, Jesus wasn't in the Navy either. He put the wind at their back and he rowed them through the middle of the night, a long row home. It will be night, says Jesus. Fair winds following seas, no. It'll be night, it will be dark, you're not ready, you'll be tired, you'll be hungry, you'll be in the middle of the sea, you'll row hard, you'll row against the wind. It'll blow you off course because you won't even get to the town you were in yet. But I'll be watching. If you want to know Jesus, sometimes he doesn't rescue his people when the wind's blowing. He doesn't come to them immediately because it's difficult. You go Daniel in the lion's den, Joseph in the prison. Paul was beaten, shipwrecked, left for dead. He had just about everything go wrong that could go wrong. Esther went into the harem. Ruth nearly died of starvation. God doesn't save his people that he watches immediately every time. He doesn't always answer our prayers the way we want or the time we want. The real Jesus lets you row against the wind, and it's a hard wind this last year and a half, hasn't it been? Number 5, we're not done yet, it's still getting worse. Just because you didn't get the quiet getaway that Jesus promised, you worked all day, you worked all night, you rowed the boat, you're all alone, you row against the wind. Jesus isn't there to explain what's going on. You get blown off course, and you still can't count on it that Jesus will be in a hurry to come and rescue you. He saw the disciples straining at the oars. The wind was against them, and it was the fourth watch of the night that he went out to them. In other words, he let them row most of the night long. There's no hurry. He saw them straining. He knew how hard it was, but he wasn't there. You know, State Farm Insurance says that we're always there. And you get the feeling that their agent is just standing around on the street corner just waiting for you to have an accident so that he can race over and help you, right? And the other one, Farmers Insurance on the TV ads has these great ads. And they show some impossible situation where farmers has been called in to help, and they say, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. And you get a feeling that they can solve it with that elephant in the living room who goes rampaging out and destroys your house. They've been there, they know that. And you love that feeling. And you think, I like that. You feel that about Jesus, like, come on, Jesus, fix our boat, stop the wind. You've seen, I know you're just right there. But he's not. He takes his time. He's watching his disciples. He watched maybe for 6 hours. Hagar went into the desert, nearly starved, and died of thirst with Ishmael. Abraham and Isaac. God waited to the last minute to rescue Isaac. He was not in a hurry. Great missionary William Carey, 200 years ago, about 1790, so it's 230 years ago. Into India, started a missionary task, and he spent 41 years of his life in India around, 1790. And he worked and he worked, and he was a landmark missionary. He is innovative and creative and dedicated to bringing the gospel to the people of India. And at the end of his life, you know what his results were? He had maybe after 40 years, 700 people were saved with the gospel at the end of his lifetime. See, Jesus isn't always in a hurry. Just not always in a hurry. But if you'd ask who changed the course of history in India, it'd be William Carey. Because he brought a message that didn't have effect right away. But over the course of time, it would. 11 schools and colleges went up and were named after him. His teaching and translations and writings and publishes his educational establishments and influence in social reform have marked the turning point of Indian culture from a downward to an upward trend. You see, it didn't happen in his lifetime. That didn't mean it didn't happen. You didn't see it. That didn't mean it didn't happen. Because God shows up exactly, precisely when he's ready. Number 5, just because you didn't get the quiet getaway this past year, remember we're talking really not about the disciples, we're talking about the church, aren't we? Us, you, me. Just because it wasn't an easy year, we didn't get the getaway that Jesus promised. You worked all day, you worked all night, you were alone, you're fighting the headwinds, you're blown off course. You don't get to see the results of all your work because the 5,000 people that you were part of a miracle for, they're all gone off doing their own thing. Jesus finally comes to his disciples, and what did he do? He was about to, what? Pass them by. Can you imagine that? They're waiting for Jesus. They want nothing more than to see Jesus. They're alone, they're afraid, they're worried, and he's going to walk right past them. Just don't walk them on by. After all his hours of waiting, he shows up. And he doesn't show up. I want to ask you how many times you've prayed and thought, Jesus, come on, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? I can't tell you the number of times I would go into my church and sort of lie on the floor in front of the stage or platform, altar, or whatever the proper name is here. And I would say, come on, God. We need 5 more people. We need 5 more neighbors and friends. We need your help. We need you to be here. Please come. Have you ever been to a party and you didn't know anybody except maybe the person who invited you, and you're at the party and you feel kind of lonely and clumsy because you're just standing there, you don't know if you got. I feel that way. I'm kind of insecure and bashful. And the person who invites you walks in and they don't say hi, they say hi, and maybe they just walk on by and see their other guests. And you feel kind of doubly alone because maybe the guest really, and the host maybe really didn't want you to be there. I don't know. And you don't know what to do. And that's, I think, what the disciples felt for a moment. He was about to walk right on by them. They're rolling away, and there he goes. We don't know how he did that. I don't know. I'm not going to even try to guess how he did that. But they saw it, and they're thinking, come on, what about me this time? Maybe you pray that way too. Say, come on, God, I need help. I need your miracle. I need your hand. I need your grace right now. I can't. I'm tired. Alone. And it seems like he's going right on by. Number 6. Just because you didn't get a quiet getaway, just because Jesus is praying by himself on the hill for a long part of the evening, you're getting clobbered on the lake and the wind is blowing against you, you're getting tired, and Jesus is in a hurry, and when he does show up, he seems to walk by you. It doesn't mean that's the end of your problems. Because when he shows up, you know what they thought? It was a ghost. Now you think, wait a minute, these are grown men, ghosts, come on, that's good stuff, that's Halloween's over. No. Chapter 6 tells us that Herod, Mark chapter 6, tells us that Herod had done in John the Baptist, as you call him. When he saw Jesus, he was so afraid that he thought Jesus was like the incarnation of John the Baptist, his ghost. And there's fear. And John was after them, which is part of why they're going out in the wilderness. They're getting away from the danger of Herod, who could kill John. He could kill Jesus and the disciples as well. They were in trouble. But more than that, they saw him walking on the water, walking on the lake, and they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and they were terrified. Now, if you lived in the ancient Near East, and you saw the wind, and you were kind of a land-based person, and you saw the wind on the lake, and you saw the waves ruffled, you would know that the spirits were on the lake. And it turns out that the word for wind, W-I-N-D, is the same word as the word for spirit. Now, if you're in Hebrew, it's ruach, and if you are Greek, it's pneuma, just like a pneumatic tool in the hardware store. It means breath. And the breath of God is the Spirit of God, and it blows across the light. So when they saw the wind against them, anybody knew that that meant the Spirit of God, or the evil spirits, were after them. And they were in trouble. And now they're alone, they're tired, they're worn out. They've been rowing all night, haven't had enough sleep for who knows how long. And they saw this in the storm and blowing against them, and they knew that against them was metaphorical for the spirits being all set against them. And now they are terrified. They cried out because they saw him, and they were terrified. Not that we should discount that. It says exactly what it meant. The people who wrote this were the people who were there, and they believed that they were in trouble. I think we feel that too sometimes. We feel like the deck is stacked against us, if you will. That the circumstances and the scenario isn't in our favor. It's Brussels sprouts. When I was hoping for corn in the cob, you know. I was out kayaking one day. Don't tell anybody this. This wasn't a very smart thing that I did, but I left Port Townsend and I paddled across to Whidbey Island, which is really not a very smart thing to do. But anyway, I want to explain it, but that's what I did. When I got to the far side, I was pretty tired. And it was a beautiful summer day, so it was nice all the way across. So I thought, I'm good. And I'll get to the other side, take the ferry boat, and I'll come home. What could be better than that? Well, the ebbing tide comes out of the Puget Sound, hits the southeast corner. You were boaters, you're laughing. I know I can see this already. You can say, no, he didn't really. But he did. And I got there, and the ebbing tide hits the south shore of Whidbey Island and bounces off and makes a left-hand turn out the straits. Well, when it does, it's smooth all the way out the middle, but right up against the shore is very rough. And I couldn't get through it with my kayak, and I was headed out for, what's that big island in Canada? Oh yeah, Vancouver. I was headed for Vancouver a lot faster than I could row. You see, paddle. See, the tide runs at about 5 knots, and the kayak runs at about 3 knots with an old guy paddling it. I was in trouble. And I looked at the whirlpools around me, and I calculated how long I would last being sucked down under water. And I cried out and said, God, help me, because it's all against me. You ever felt like that? I want to tell you, I lived. People ask me afterwards, every time I say this story, yes, I did live. But I wasn't sure at the time. And sometimes we feel that way, don't we? We don't know that it's going to turn out okay at the time. Maybe you've got something like that in your life you're worried. Number 7, just because you didn't get a quiet getaway, just because Jesus is praying for it, just because you're getting clobbered on the lake and Jesus isn't in a hurry to come with you, and you don't get the wind is against you, and you think the evil spirits are against you, some ghost is about to take you down and drown you in the middle of the sea. There's no reason to believe that when Jesus gets in your boat, that you'll even recognize him. Yeah. They saw him walking on the lake. They thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and they were terrified and they didn't recognize him. I know I just read that verse, but I want to say it again. They didn't know who he was. They saw him, but they didn't see him. They didn't know him. And sometimes I have friends who say, oh, God told me this, and God told me that. God told me I was at the store and I should get Brussels sprouts. And that'll be what I need to do. And sometimes that's true. I mean, I know it's true. But sometimes we don't. We just go on. We keep going. Just because you didn't get a quiet getaway and Jesus is praying for you and healing you after all that long, and the wind is against you, you're tired, you're hungry, you're lonely, he comes to see you, he's about to pass you by, you're terrified that you're being attacked, not helped. There's no reason to believe that when he explains it to you, that you'll get it. They thought they saw a ghost and they cried out. Long passage. They saw him, they were terrified, and immediately he spoke to them. And they said, oh, now we get it. No. He spoke to them and he said, take courage, it is I. Very technical theological term, ego eimi, it is me. Don't be afraid. Okay, that settles it, right? So if Jesus walked in here today instead of me, he said, hey everybody, it's okay. Take heart, it's me. It's good. Everybody would say, oh, okay, everything's good. No. Then he climbed into the boat with him and the wind died down. So all of their prayers are answered now. And the response was what? They were completely amazed, which means out of their minds. They didn't get it because they didn't understand the loaves and their hearts were hardened. You know, they'd been rowing too long. They were tired. They had seen the answer. They prayed for the answer. And they got the answer, finally. And then they didn't see it when it was right in front. They didn't see Jesus. All they saw was Brussels sprouts. Now, forgive me, I don't mean that quite that way, but all they saw was their fears, their doubts, their worries. And they didn't see that Jesus had come to be with them. He spoke to them and said, take courage, it's I. And I wish sometimes Jesus would do that to me. You just stop and say, hey, Dave, take courage, it's me, I'm with you all the way, man. Don't be afraid. And I'd like to think I would say, oh, okay, good. But I think I would say, yeah, but you don't know about all my stuff. Yeah, I got some issues. You got options. Confuse Jesus with a ghost. How's that for commitment? They're no better than Herod. Right? Because that's what Herod did. They thought this was the ghost of John the Baptist. Herod. They don't understand the meaning of fish and bread. These are dogs who don't recognize their own master, these disciples are. Brothers and sisters, sometimes there's a huge purpose going on in this chapter. And I think this chapter is told for you and me because sometimes we don't see it. We miss it. And we don't see Jesus. We're looking for the butter and the garlic, and we forget there's a bitter cross in our plate. That's not the end. We're still not at the end yet. Don't be discouraged by this, because I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm trying to be unfair. I want to tell the truth. Sometimes it's a long, hard road through COVID, or whatever we have to do. Let's come to the end here. I don't think we can roll through this anymore. Just because you didn't get the retreat that Jesus promised to you, you gave your lunch to the 5,000 people. You got the leftovers. Okay, that was good. You got in the boat, you rode all night, you got blown off course, the wind was against you, you were terrified out of your mind because you thought the evil spirits were coming to get you. Jesus finally shows up. You get all confused by that, and you're terrified to boot. He explains it to you, you still don't get it, and he looks at you like, oh, you guys. And you wonder how you can fail anymore. And when you can't go on to take another step, your boat scrapes against the shore of the other side. And that's what this story, this passage is all about. It's not about the hard road. It's about what happened at the end of it. And I want to be as clear as I can. You and I have a long passage of COVID. And other things too. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges, aren't there? But at the end of it, the boat scrapes on the shore on the other side. They crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret, and they anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They recognized, remember this whole chapter is about being recognized. You go read it from start to end. It's all about who recognized Jesus. And he comes to the other side after all of this. The first thing that would happen is that they knew who he was and what he stood for and what he was all about. They ran throughout the whole region. They carried the sick en masse to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, so this wasn't just this morning, this was a long, protracted period of time. Wherever you went, villages and towns and the countryside where the disciples had just been in the earlier part of chapter 6, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let him touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. The worst and the darkest and the longest night of their life was followed by the most glorious day and weeks of their life. Jesus said, take courage, it's I. I'll be with you already. I don't care if you don't understand. You don't need to understand. I'll be there anyway. Suddenly you realize he pushed you into the boat when you didn't want to go because that's where you needed to be. He prayed for you all night long because you had something to do on the other side that couldn't let you get worried. He saw the struggle. He didn't let you get worn out. He just let you exercise. He paid to go to the gym to do that. Why not? In a boat. He knew the wind would be against you. That's okay. You think it was evil spirits, but that's okay because he was going to beat the evil spirits and show you that he was in charge of the evil spirits so you wouldn't be afraid the next time. He cared deeply that you were struggling, and when he came to you, he got in the boat. He explained everything to you, and when you didn't understand it, it was okay. He didn't need to insult you or embarrass you because he had bigger things for you to do. He's going to take you to the other side. And when you get there, at just exactly that moment, that's when you know that it was Jesus who drew the crowd. He pulled him there, and all the things he did worked. All the ministry that they did in the villages in the early part of chapter 6 worked, and the people came from everywhere. Like William Carey, they didn't see it at first. They had to go through this entire ordeal. And at the end, the people were there. Jesus saved their lives, and they came to be with Jesus. We get mixed up. Sometimes we want the answers right away. We don't want to go through the long rowing of the night. We want everything fixed right away. We want to fly first class right over the storm. We like corn on the cob and Brussels sprouts. And I want to affirm that, by the way. But down in the middle of it, if you're a disciple, there's this struggle. And at the far end of it, there's Jesus. And we recognize him finally. We say, this is Jesus. He saves us. He heals us. He renews us. He saves us from our sins. He forgives our hardness of heart. He picks us up when we can't row another stroke. And he takes us to the far side. I know when COVID's over. I don't know when all our challenges are over. I think it's at the end of time. But this I know. Jesus is watching. He's praying. He shows up when he needs to. He shows up when we need him. And then he shows us at the end that he's got the whole situation well in hand. Because when he shows up, people run to him and they're saved. I'd like to ask you to pray with me this morning. Lord God, as we finish the service, it's a story from the lives of Jesus and the disciples, almost 2,000 years old. And it can lie there and be cold and inert, or it can be our story. Because we feel sometimes like we're in a boat, and we row hard, and it feels like the wind is against us. I pray, Lord, be with us. Remind us, encourage us, strengthen us, that you're with us right to the end. What we do is in your plan, it's in your will, it's in your hands and in your care. And I pray, Lord, that at Redeemer Church, you will be here with each one of us. You fill us with your strength, with your peace, the assurance that you are with us, and you are taking us all the way to the far side, where we will once again see your hand at work. In Christ's name, amen.